At 10 that night, I was in a locked elevator under Area 51, staring at a dead-zone phone and trying to decide whether to call my son and lie to him again. I had promised Mason I would call before his field trip bus left in the morning. I never thought I could make the trip. Promises like that had grown too expensive in our house. I just needed to call, hear his voice before sunrise, manage one small thing a father ought to be able to do. The elevator dropped past hangars, radar rooms, fuel decks, and the levels people like to imagine when they talked about the base. My stop sat much lower, under a blank patch of Nevada desert nobody on the outside could have found with a finger and a map. Sub-Level K handled gate traffic on Red Harvest Night, the one night each year when the sky over Groom Lake went copper and the aperture below us stopped fighting the world hard enough for heavy transfers. My job sounded harmless if you said it quickly. I certified route integrity. I checked whether what went through matched what was supposed to come back. Same lane, same timing, same quantity, same chain of authorization. If a route looked wrong, I could stall it. If it looked catastrophically wrong, I could stop it. Before the civilian badge, I had spent 12 years in Air Force communications. That taught me two useful things. Machines lie in patterns. Men lie for reasons, and the reasons are usually worse. The elevator opened on white concrete, armed guards, and the dry heat of equipment rooms that never slept. Eric Boone waited outside the cage with a tablet under one arm and his bay badge hanging crooked from his neck. Boone knew every truck, lift motor, blast hinge, and duct run on the level. He also knew bad news before command admitted it. "You're late," he said. "I had a phone in my hand." "And? I put it away." His face barely changed, but he took that answer in like a man filing away damage. Boone had a wife in Rachel and two daughters old enough to know their father did something secret and hated it. Years ago, after one ugly swing shift, he told me the worst thing about this place wasn't what it hid. It was how often it taught decent men to call absence necessary. We started toward the checkpoint. "Hanley's already hot," Boone said. "Traffic board lit a lane nobody can name. He wants your sign-off before Wild gets here." "Why before Wild?" Boone gave me a look. "Because once Wild sees it, it becomes history. If you sign first, it becomes procedure." That was Boone. He understood systems as social weapons. Maybe better than I did. We passed through armed screening and into the control ring. Glass walls looked down 4 floors into the gate chamber below. In the middle sat the aperture array. Alloy ribs, superconductive rails, a well cut into older rock. People up top liked to think Area 51 had been built to test aircraft. The truth sat under their boots like a buried tooth. Major Reed Hanley stood at the central display with one hand on the rail, sleeves rolled, tie gone, holster low on his hip. He looked like a recruiting poster for calm authority until you knew him long enough to see what sat under the calm. Hanley liked systems he could lock, men he could place, and narratives he could survive inside. "You took your time, Carver," he said. "You dragged me out of my driveway. I came. I need the parity board certified." He turned the main display toward me. The transfer map filled the wall. Our lane in blue, mirror facility in green, return traffic in white. 3 active channels should have been building toward the window. There were 4. The extra lane sat low in the model like a scar under skin. It had no origin tag, no authorization tree, no valid history. Traffic markers moved across it in bursts that ignored the normal cadence. "How long has this been live?" I asked. 23 minutes. "Who opened it?" "That can wait." "No." His eyes settled on me. "Tonight moves whether you enjoy the paperwork or not." That told me enough to dislike whatever came next. I went to my station. Boone stayed close without hovering, the way people do when they want to be seen as neither hovering nor absent. My board showed the same sickness the wall did. Handshakes arriving too early. Valid route strings attached to impossible route paths. One analog failsafe had come online by itself, which should have required a technician in a sealed crawl space, and a key older than I was. I stripped the history down to raw signal and ran it again. The extra lane remained. Worse, the live checksum from the mirror site was missing the human noise packet that always rode under cargo confirmation. We called it entropy. It accounted for bodies in motion. Confusion, hesitation, misloads, panic, injuries, all the mess flesh dragged through any clean system. If the mirror site had forgotten it, then they were incompetent under pressure. If someone had removed it, then the route had been stripped of the one thing that made human traffic legible. "Hanley," I said, "I'm not certifying this." The room changed around those words. Quietly, but enough. He came to my console. "Your caution is noted. My caution is that we have an active lane without an origin, impossible arrivals, and a mirror stream missing the packet that says living people are on the other end. I sign this and you can pretend the board saw something safe." His face stayed calm in the way senior officers learn when they mean to steamroll someone. "You are assuming facts not in evidence." "Then provide evidence." Silence. That answered more than any explanation could have. I pushed back from the console. No sign-off. A small movement flickered at the edge of his mouth. "Boone." Boone straightened. "Sir? Take Carver to Bay 2. Let him see what his delay has brought us." That was Hanley's style. If rank failed, he buried you in reality until disgust or fear moved you where procedure could not. We took a freight lift down 2 levels. Bay 2 sat behind thick doors with a red seal lamp rotating overhead. Guards in containment aprons stood at the entrance. The air inside carried the iron bite of fresh blood and hot engine metal. I followed Boone through the door and stopped. 6 vehicles sat under floodlamps. 2 troop carriers, 3 cargo trucks, 1 armored scout. They looked as if they had been fed through machinery designed by someone who knew what a convoy was supposed to look like and hated the people inside it. 1 troop carrier had its windshield packed from within by a lattice of hands. Different sizes, different uniforms, wrists cut at different lengths and jammed together under cracked safety glass. 1 cargo truck stood open at the back. Bodies filled the racks where tool crates should have sat. Someone had arranged them to imitate discipline. Harness clips locked around bone, seatbelts passed through opened chests. A woman's jaw had been stitched to the collar of a man in another uniform. 2 drivers had their arms threaded through a steering column and fixed into the dash with surgical staples and strips of their own skin. Identification cards from our base and the mirror site had been tucked into wounds, under tongues, into eye sockets. Both worlds were in the pile. That much was obvious before I read a single name. Boone spoke beside me, quieter than I had ever heard him. "Same on the other side, before their line died. Tech got a call through." "Who told you that?" He waited a beat. "A mirror dispatcher who still knew my voice long enough to scream." Hanley came in behind us with 2 security men. "Now do you understand why the window opens on time?" he asked. Panic helps nobody. I stepped onto the lead carrier's running board and leaned into the cabin. The driver's chest had been opened from sternum to navel and packed with route tags, torn gloves, and transfer manifests, soaked dark. The passenger had no lower face. A radio handset sat in its place, the cord threaded through the throat and out the back of the neck. Something crackled in the dash speaker. One of the guards flinched. The handset spat static, then a clipped male voice, calm as dispatch. "Load 3 confirmed. Family unit stable. Route green. Keep the boy asleep." The last sentence came back in a child's voice. "Keep the boy asleep." The speaker cut out. Nobody moved. Then the truck behind us started talking too. A woman's voice from deep in the cargo rack said, "We are arriving on schedule." A child from another vehicle answered, "Please leave backpacks under your seat." A third voice, older, half buried in crackles, said, three roads, you missed." It died there. "What in God's name did this?" Boone asked. I kept looking at the bodies. Panic wasn't the problem. Pattern was. Whoever had built this understood our routing language. The dead were sorted by lane class, payload order, transfer position. The cards in the wounds formed sequence marks. The clusters inside each vehicle mapped the same balancing ratios used to regulate live exchange between installations. The convoy had become a diagram. I climbed into the cargo truck and forced myself to keep counting. Left side, 5 bodies, right side, 5. Overhead braces wrapped with tendon and cable in alternating intervals. Old archive notation. I crossed to the next truck. Different arrangement. Same logic. By the time I finished the 6th vehicle, the message had surfaced. Sub-level J South Branch. Archived municipal training. I climbed down. Hanley was watching me too closely. You see something? Yes. What? You already know. Before he could answer, Bay 2 opened again, and Dr. Helen Wilde walked in wearing a grey suit under a disposable apron, silver hair pulled back so tightly it sharpened the bones of her face. She took one look into the nearest truck and came straight toward me. "Did you map it?" she asked. The question landed like a slap. Boone stared at her. Hanley's expression hardened by a degree. "You knew there was a message," I said. "I expected a pattern," Wilde said. "I didn't expect this level of anatomical fluency." She stepped onto the running board and studied the passenger with the radio in his throat. The cuts preserve speech loops. Current through damaged hardware is re-triggering conditioned audio. "Conditioned from what?" Boone asked. She glanced at him. "We talk elsewhere." Hanley moved between us. "Carver certifies the board. Wilde handles the rest." "No," I said. One of the guards shifted his rifle higher. Wilde looked from him to me, then back at the convoy. I watched her choose between 2 kinds of damage. "He comes with me," she said. Hanley's jaw set. "You don't own this level. I built half the protocols keeping it alive. Old protocols. Old enough to matter tonight." She turned to me. "If you mapped sub-level J, then you're already inside the part of this secret that makes it dangerous. Come now, or stay here while Reed opens a route he cannot explain." Boone said, "Daniel, stay in the bay," I told him. "Touch nothing without me or Wilde." Hanley gave a dry little laugh. "You assume you still have authority." "No," I said. "I assume you've been hiding rot under my console for years, and I'm done pretending not to smell it." Wilde had already started for the door. I followed her. We cut through a maintenance corridor behind the control ring and ended in a locked relay room I'd only seen on dead schematics. Obsolete copper patchboards lined one wall under dust covers. Wilde sealed the door and yanked one cover down. "Sit," she said. "I'll stand." "Then stand and listen." She plugged 2 manual patch cords into the board like a woman handling an old weapon. The project under this base began as material transfer, then personnel transfer, then replacement. The room seemed to lose light. Replacement. Controlled cross-world substitution, trained, screened, behaviorally prepared. I stared at her. "You swapped people." "We swapped roles," she said automatically. I laughed once. It sounded ugly in the relay room. That sentence alone ought to bury everyone who ever signed this program. A flicker crossed her face. Fatigue, not defense. "Perhaps it will. Tonight I need you functional before I need you outraged." She plugged in a 3rd line. Both installations took losses in the early years. Key staff, politically sensitive civilians. Family structures neither side wanted publicly broken. The gate made continuity possible. The word continuity sat in the room like poison. "Say it plain," I said. Her hand stopped for half a second. "We taught some people to take other people's places." That was better. Worse, but better. What is sub-level J? Municipal acclamation. A training site. A town. Yes. To teach strangers how to pass for family. Her voice flattened. Among other things. I thought of the IDs in the wounds. And now something else has your language. Yes. What else? She looked at me directly then. A 3rd lane. An adjacent world. It doesn't mirror. It collects transfer rubble. Failed placements, contaminated scripts, abandoned patterning. We knew it brushed the route. We did not understand how much it had learned. The honesty cost her something. I could see that now. I moved to the second station. Which path still works? Maintenance Spine 5. That was retired. It was hidden. That too. I patched the legacy line, entered the old key, and waited. For 3 seconds the scope showed nothing. Then the signal bit. A screen above the patchboard snapped alive. A man looked back at me with my own face. He sat in a control room built to our plan and wrecked by something that had come too close. One wall had caved inward. Red alarm strobes painted him in pulsing bloodlight. He had my narrow shoulders, my habit of leaning toward a monitor under strain, the same tired crease at the mouth. He saw me and nearly broke. "Oh, thank God," he said. "You're still there." The shock lasted less than a second. Training and dread burned it away. "Who hit your lane?" I asked. "It started in town," he said. "Reed let survivors through. We thought they were ours. They had family scripts, school scripts, street names. They got into triage, comms, dispatch." He coughed hard and looked at the blood in his hand as if it surprised him. "Listen to me. Anything that comes through asking for wife, son, mother, unit, anything human, keep it outside. What is the third lane?" His eyes flicked towards something off-screen. "Close to us. Too close. We called it the adjacent. When we built the town, we gave it a classroom." A crash sounded beyond him. Wild stepped into view. "Daniel, is municipal compromised?" He looked at her, and something fierce and wounded crossed his face. "Helen, you're alive." "For the moment. You did this." She didn't flinch. "I know." He turned back to me. "South Branch School. Burn the voice room first, then..." The signal tore with static. Below us, a deeper alarm started to howl. Wild snapped toward the door. "The gate is opening!" "It can't," I said. "Hanley doesn't have my sign-off." She gave me a look that made clear how ceremonial my sign-off had probably been for years. The control ring was in motion when we hit it. Technicians shouting, operators cutting across each other, the main wall showing the aperture climbing toward activation on the unauthorized lane. Hanley stood at the rail barking orders fast enough to sound useful. The chamber lights surged. Below us the gate woke. It never looked the same twice. Sometimes it bent the room. Sometimes it seemed to pull distance inside out. That night it opened like a wound under deep water. The black center widened, shimmered and produced headlights. A vehicle rolled out of the dark, yellow body, school district markings, dust caked on the tires, one side mirror gone, front door hanging open, a school bus. It crossed the threshold slowly, as if someone had eased it through traffic and then stepped away from the wheel. It stopped in containment and left the engine idling. Then the interior speakers came alive. A woman's voice, bright and worn and trying to stay patient. "Front seats stay empty unless I tell you otherwise." Children answered over one another. "Miss Carla, Evan took my marker. I got a P. My dad said we're going to California after school. Hands inside the aisle." A little girl started a field trip song, lost it halfway through, and slipped into convoy cadence. Lane green, family unit 6. Another child cut across her. "He bit me." Then a boy, older, voice trying for brave and failing. "My name is Mason Carver. My stop is..." I was already moving for the stairs. Wild caught my sleeve. I tore free and hit the lower run with 2 security men behind me. By the time I reached the bay, the bus door was open and hard white light was washing the empty seats. I climbed aboard with my pistol out and my badge light cutting across torn vinyl. The driver's seat was empty. The aisle held no children. Backpacks sat under seats, some open, some zipped. A lunchbox rested in the aisle with a cartoon astronaut on the lid. The overhead speaker crackled again. "My name is Mason Carver. My stop is 2 roads past the quarry." It wasn't my son's exact voice. It was worse. close enough to turn my knees weak. He had said that line 2 years earlier when Claire made him practice his route after they moved out by Spanish Springs. I had been on speakerphone from this same facility, listening with half my attention while he recited every landmark so he wouldn't miss his stop. I had laughed when he got too serious about it. He had asked when I was coming home. Wild stood in the doorway. She saw my face and understood too much. "You harvested family recordings," I said. Her answer came very quiet. "The town archived domestic cadence, calls, forms, school recordings, public traces. We told ourselves it was procedure because theft was harder to say." That was the first honest sentence I had heard from her all night. Gunfire cracked above us. Hanley's voice hit the bay intercom, sharp and controlled. "All unauthorized personnel step away from the vehicle. Carver, Wild, report to control immediately." Wild looked up toward the ring, then back at me. "If it's using your family, your file is in active circulation. We go below now." I looked down the aisle at the backpacks and the lunchbox and the dusty floor where children had once stood, and where something else had crossed through them after. The thing in the third lane had reached into my life through a recording I made while failing to be a father. The fit was so precise it felt rehearsed. "Take me," I said. Sub-level J sat below a locked freight spine between decommissioned storage and a geological survey wing scrubbed from every live map. Wild had access. Boone got us through the service door by telling comms he'd been ordered to escort evidence, then muting the channel before anyone could question him. The lift groaned down into darkness and opened on a street. For 1 full second, my brain refused the scale. Underground levels had pipes, rails, cinder block, cable trays. They did not have sidewalks. This one did. A small American town stretched away from the lift under an artificial sky painted pale blue across a curved concrete ceiling. Track lights cast permanent afternoon over clappered houses, mailboxes, a chrome-trimmed diner, a barber pole frozen mid-turn, and a school behind chain-link fencing. Streets met at clean angles. Plastic leaves had gathered against curbs in neat drifts that some custodian had once arranged by hand and then left there for years. Cars from different decades lined the blocks, washed, waxed, empty. Boone said, "My girls learned bus drills younger than that." It wasn't addressed to anyone, maybe not even to me. It made the place worse. Wild stood with her hands loose at her sides, looking not shocked but tired in a way that reached the bone. "Municipal acclimation site," she said. "We called it Ashton." "Why give it a name?" Boone asked. "It improved retention," Wild said. I looked at her. "You built a town under the desert so you could teach strangers how to steal lives. We told ourselves it prevented collapse. You people always have a sentence ready." We moved fast, though the place invited staring. The houses were staged to different incomes, regions, habits. One kitchen held church bulletins, baseball schedules, unpaid bills. Another had college brochures, hardware store flyers, a casserole dish waiting to be brought somewhere. Family photographs sat in frames. I stopped at one. A man from the convoy smiled beside a woman I didn't know, and 2 children whose eyes had the flat vacancy of stock photography. They were assigned people, not remembered ones. Templates wearing the shape of affection. The school doors stood open. Inside, fluorescent panels lit waxed hallways and bulletin boards full of student work made by adult hands imitating children. Multiplication tables, state birds, fire drill routes. At the far end, double doors opened into a gym. Coloured tape on the floor marked greeting drills, wave to teacher, 3-second eye contact, laugh with peers, trade local complaint, ask about weather delay. Each instruction had been painted where children would line up for class. Boone stared at the floor. Jesus Christ. Wild kept walking. "The voice room is through the library." I grabbed her arm. "My family. How much of them is down here?" "Enough for patterning." "That means what?" "Clips, calls, school forms, address history, routine. Not enough to rebuild a life." I held her a second longer. That's supposed to comfort me. Something in her face shifted. Shame, stripped of ceremony. No, it's the part of the truth I can say without hiding behind language. We entered the library. Instead of books, the shelves held spool cases, reel transfers, hard drives catalogued in bins, and tape players modified into digital harvest stations. At the back sat a glass booth with microphones, intercom switches, and a rack of playback machines. The voice room. I found my own name in a drawer partly by accident and then by compulsion. Carver, Daniel, Carver, Claire, Carver, Mason. 3 slim cases with timestamps and subject tags. Boone saw what I had found and looked away. Wilde didn't. I should have left them there. Instead, I slid Mason's reel into the nearest player. My son's voice filled the room at 9 years old, breathless with excitement, talking about a field trip to Virginia City and the tunnel the bus had gone through. Claire kept telling him to slow down. In the background, I heard myself, distant and distracted, saying I had to go. The tape clicked off. Somewhere in the school, a child laughed. I drew my pistol and turned. The sound had come from the hallway. Boone raised his shotgun. Movement. Wilde pointed toward a basement door. Clinic below. Damaged placements went there. We went down a narrow stairwell into a tiled medical suite. Cabinets stood open. Gurneys lined the walls. In the 3rd room we found what had laughed. At first I thought it was a man strapped upright to a standing frame. Then I saw the frame had been grown into him. He wore pieces of 3 uniforms stitched together at the shoulders. His abdomen had been opened and closed in sections, each seam held by surgical wire. Clear rods thin as fishing line rose from holes along the spine, spread under the skin across his back, and disappeared into the base of the skull. One arm belonged to a younger man than the face. The left eye was grey, the right was brown. His mouth had too many scars to close properly. He lifted his head toward us with a slow, curious tilt, like a child sorting flashcards. "Good evening," he said in a cheerful female voice. Then, in a boy's voice, "My stop is 2 roads past the quarry." Then in a tired father's voice, "Keep the boy asleep." Boone took half a step back. Wilde whispered, "It's still indexing." The thing looked at her, its mouth stretched. "Dr. Wilde, smile for parent pickup." Then it turned to me, and the next voice landed close enough to Mason to cut through muscle. "Dad!" I fired once into its chest. The round kicked it against the frame. Blood ran. The clear fibers under the skin brightened with wet blue light branching from spine to neck. The body jerked, not in pain but in choice. It came off the frame in a rush. The right arm tore loose first, dragging hardware. The glass threads under the skin snapped and held and snapped again like tension wire. Boone fired both barrels into the torso at close range and knocked it into a cabinet. Instruments burst across the floor. It hit the tiles, crawling. Human joints did part of the work. The rest came from those clear fibers running where nerves should never have lived. It seized Boone's boot and spoke in Wilde's voice. "Tell me what remains." Boone stomped its wrist and jammed the shotgun under its chin. The blast took the face off above the mouth. It still moved. Wilde ripped a portable cautery wand from a crash cart and shoved it at me. "Base of the spine. Burn through." I dropped to one knee, drove the arc tip into the exposed channel at the neck, and thumbed the charge. Blue fire raced through the clear lattice. The body convulsed, folded, and collapsed as though the strings holding the man together had finally burned through. Silence dropped hard. Then the school's PA clicked alive overhead. "Dr. Wilde," Hanley said, "step away from the specimen. Carver and Boone are in violation of containment. Security teams are entering the site." Boone wiped blood from where a tray had clipped his mouth. "He followed us." "Of course he did," Wilde said. I looked down at the ruined composite. "You knew gunfire wouldn't be enough. I knew damage wasn't stopping them on the other side. You always say it sideways." Her eyes snapped to mine. "Because plain truth came too late to save anyone who built this." Boots hammered across tile somewhere above us. We ran. Hanley's men entered through the library as we cut down a side hall lined with art projects and family night flyers. One guard saw Boone and raised his rifle. Boone slammed the shotgun stock into the man's jaw without breaking stride. We burst through a side exit into the false afternoon of the town square. On one side stood a courthouse facade, on the other a church. Wilde said once while we ran, church basement was grief rehearsal, wakes, condolences, how long to hold a widow's hand. I believed her without needing more. The overhead PA had begun cycling corrupted training clips through the whole town. Welcome to the neighborhood. Take your shoes off inside. Mason, keep up. Officer, my husband is at work. Aunt Linda drives a red... The town had become a mouth. Boone pointed at the lift. There. We reached the platform just as Hanley stepped out of a service corridor with 4 security men in respirators and flame-resistant suits. He held a tablet in one hand, pistol in the other. You have seen enough, he said. Behind him, another team rolled fuel canisters toward the school. I raised my gun. Move. Lower it, Daniel. You don't want mutiny stacked on top of the rest. The rest being what? Looking where you told me not to. The rest being theft of restricted material, assault on security personnel, and compromise of a continuity program that has kept 2 governments stable for half a century. Wilde stared at him. You still say it out loud as if phrasing makes it lawful. Hanley's eyes stayed on me. Lawful has very little to do with it. Necessary does. Boone shifted left of me. That thing downstairs used your dead like phrasebooks. That, Hanley said, is why this ends here. He tapped the tablet. Somewhere in town, gas lines opened with a savage hiss. Emergency shutters slammed down over storefront windows. Ashton prepared to burn. Wilde said, if you ignite municipal while the ghost lane is active, you'll spike heat back into the core. I'll take the risk. You won't be the one paying it, I said. His gaze flicked to me, and for the first time that night I saw something other than control. Fear. Fear of losing ownership of the story told afterward. That made him simple. I shot the tablet out of his hand. It exploded in black glass. Security opened fire at once. Boone shoved Wilde behind the lift wall as rounds chewed stucco off the courthouse facade. I dropped behind a parked sedan and fired twice, forcing 2 guards to cover behind a cluster of mailboxes. Below us, alarms changed pitch. The gate was widening. We go up now, Wilde said. Boone hit the lift call. It descended with infuriating calm while the fake town around us began to fail. One house window burst from heat. Orange light rolled across the painted sky overhead. The lift reached us. Boone hauled Wilde inside. I covered the door. Hanley stepped from cover and called over the gunfire. Listen to me, Carver. Every command structure on both sides touched the placement pipeline. Governors, judges. Missing children recovered alive. Witnesses under seal. Prisoners returned from nowhere. You expose it, you don't ruin careers. You ruin trust. I fired at him. He dropped back. The doors closed. As we rose, Ashton sank into fire and smoke, and the voices in its speakers kept teaching no one how to be human. When we reached the upper level, the base was already coming apart. The outer corridor was a battlefield made of false calls, overturned carts, and gunfire aimed at friendly voices. Blood striped the floor in handprints and boot tracks. Somewhere in the East Branch, a woman cried out for her husband, and the sound cut off. Boone took one look and said, "He let people in." Wilde pointed toward the ring. "Core first." We ran past a security post where 2 guards lay with their throats opened by cuts too neat for panic violence. A speaker above us clicked on. "Daniel?" Claire said. I stopped before I could help it. Wilde seized my sleeve. "Extraction lure." Claire's voice came again, warmer this time, using the tone she had used after Mason woke from a nightmare and refused to sleep alone. "Danny, please. He wants you." The next voice was Boone's daughter, though I had never met her. Then Hanley's dead assistant. Then the busboy again. The adjacent had gotten into the base audio net and was sorting us with everything it had ever stolen. We reached the ring and found out how far it had spread. 9 people knelt under guard by the central consoles, mirror site survivors, or what passed for them. 3 men in torn uniforms, 1 woman in medical scrubs, 2 gate techs, and 3 civilian operators. The badges were right. The injuries were right. The fear was almost right. Hanley had admitted them through emergency intake. I knew they were wrong the instant one of the technicians said to a guard, "Tell Judy her casserole dish is in the trunk." Judy Nolan worked Bay 3. She carried every casserole in warm with both hands. Never a trunk. Not once in 10 years. Boone heard it too. His eyes met mine. The woman in scrubs began crying in a thin, ragged way that pulled half the room toward her. "Please," she said. "Please, my people are still back there." One of the supposed soldiers lifted his head and asked the nearest analyst, "Is the Civic Road still open?" There was no Civic Road in the live base. There had been one in Ashton. I raised my pistol. "Down! They're compromised." The room hesitated. That half-second cost us. The woman in scrubs drove her thumbs up under the jaw of the guard beside her. He dropped in a sheet of blood. One of the soldiers tore free of his restraints as if they had been decorative and smashed a console into the second guard's face. The rest moved at once, all of them aiming for speakers, doors, and power access instead of escape. Wild was already yelling at the technicians to kill the intercom bus when the first false survivor reached the speaker node and patched a portable line into it. The whole level woke up screaming in borrowed family voices. Men broke cover at the sound of wives calling their names. A nurse ran toward a crying child and took a blade of clear glass through the side of her head. One civilian operator climbed onto the central rail and began reciting bus safety rules while the skin at his neck split and transparent fibers uncoiled underneath. Boone shoved a pistol into my left hand. "Split." We did. I went for the node. Boone took the left flank. Wild cut low through the consoles toward core control. A false technician came at me with a fire axe. I shot him twice in the sternum. He kept moving until I hit the throat, and even then he only slowed. At his collar, the skin had torn open enough for me to see why. Glass branches, wet, shining, driving the body like rains. I sidestepped, slammed him into the speaker rack, and drove him through it. Sparks blew across the floor. The family voices chopped, stuttered, and died. The silence made the gunfire worse. "Carver!" Boone shouted. I turned in time to see him on the far side of Blast Door South with 3 wounded staff and 2 false survivors moving through the smoke behind them. If those things broke into the secondary corridor, they had a clean line to upper access. The blast door control was 6 feet from my hand. Boone saw me see it. He had 1 injured tech under his arm, another was crawling. The third would never clear the threshold in time. The false survivors were too close. I saw the geometry at once. I had time to save Boone and maybe 2, not all 3. Not with those things on them. "Daniel!" I hit the switch. The blast door came down like judgment. Boone threw the nearest wounded man under it and nearly lost his own leg doing it. The second rolled through. The third stayed on the wrong side with Boone and the 2 false survivors 3 steps back. Boone looked at me through the narrowing gap. He didn't accuse me. Men who live inside hard systems long enough learn where blame stops being useful. He gave 1 sharp nod toward the fuel manifold access on the wall beside him. Then he shot the pipe. White flame filled the corridor. The blast door sealed on it with Boone still beyond. The impact shuddered through the ring. Everyone near the south rail dropped instinctively. I stayed where I was, staring at a wall of steel that had become a tomb because I had pushed a button fast enough. Wild's hand hit my shoulder. "Move!" I moved. Hanley waited in the core bridge above the aperture controls with a shotgun leveled across the console pit and 2 dead security men at his feet. He must have come in through command access while the ring was tearing itself apart. 1 cheek was open from shrapnel now, soot on 1 sleeve. The damage made him look more honest. "Put the gun down," he said. "No." He jerked the barrel toward the main display. The ghost lane had widened. Through the live feed, I could now see more than darkness. Headlights stacked deep in the aperture. Civilian profile. Multiple vehicles. "Look at it," he said. "If I hold this sight long enough, I can route the breach back into the mirror installation. We lose them. We keep this side." "You mean we bury it?" "I mean, we preserve a country." "With what in it?" Wilde said. He ignored her. "Your son wakes tomorrow in a world that still trusts school buses and fire crews and county deputies. Or he wakes in one where every returned prisoner, every found child, every official who survived impossible odds becomes suspect. Institutions don't survive that kind of question." He believed every word. That was the real horror in him. Arithmetic, not cruelty. I said, "And how many people did you swap to buy that faith?" His eyes hardened. "Enough!" He shifted the shotgun a fraction toward Wilde, reading me, deciding whose value would move me fastest. That was his mistake. I fired first. The round hit his shoulder and spun him into the side console. The shotgun roared and blew a bank of screens into black shards. Wilde went down. I crossed the pit before he could recover and slammed him into the rail. Up close, he looked older than I had ever allowed. Not larger, smaller. A man who had spent half his life choosing what history got to say and had mistaken that for strength. "You think there's a clean version of this?" he said through his teeth. I drove his wounded shoulder into the rail hard enough to strip the shotgun from his hand. "There was," I said. "You buried it every time silence was easier." He reached for the backup on his ankle. I shot him through the chest. He fell without ceremony and lay staring at the ceiling lights like a man still trying to draft the memo that would excuse him. Wilde pushed herself up, blood running from a cut above her brow. "Relay bridge, now!" The old diagnostic path held long enough for one last call. My counterpart came back on screen, half on the floor of his ruined control room. Sparks rained from a torn cable bundle behind him. The room sounded wrong. Distant impacts, something wet and tearing in the halls. "You still there?" I said. He coughed blood. "For a minute." Wilde leaned into frame. "Tell us how to kill it." His eyes found her, then me. "Failsafe. Founders built it after the first command dispute. Dual consent matrix burn. Matching operator profiles on both sides. Same genetic anchor. Same access class. Trigger from both control seats, and the gate strips its own routing core." Wilde said, "You can do your side." He closed his eyes for half a beat. "No. Core breach in west access. They're inside the chamber." I understood before she did. Or maybe she understood and wanted me not to. He looked straight at me. "You can still cross while the lane holds. Use my badge on this side. Profile match gets you in." Wilde shook her head. "The ghost lane is unstable." "It'll hold for one man," he said. "After that, it won't matter." The wall feed deepened. Beyond our chamber and beyond his, a third transfer yard came into view under another sky. Vehicles waited there in neat civic order, like a county staging lot before an evacuation. School buses, ambulances, sheriff cruisers, utility trucks, family sedans with booster seats visible through the glass. Men and women moved among them, human until they turned and the lights caught the clear architecture rising under skin at jaw and neck. They had built an invasion out of ordinary life. Wilde went pale under the blood on her face. "How many placements?" "Enough," my counterpart said, giving Hanley's word a new and sick meaning. "They learned on our dead. They learned in the town. They're ready for population contact." He fumbled at his collar and pulled free a badge. "Bridge locker by your gate. Return pack. We mirrored emergency kits." Wilde turned to another console. "I can force an evidence burst out through the archive relays before command hard kills the grid." "Do it," I said. She looked at me. "Daniel." I knew the shape of what she wanted to say. It came anyway, smaller. "You may not get back. My son may not get tomorrow if I stay." That was the cleanest sentence I spoke all night. Then go. I recorded the message to Mason in a service alcove because I couldn't afford for anyone else to hear it. The wall camera was cheap, and the overhead light washed half my face flat white. Good. He didn't need a better image of me than that. Mason, I said. My mouth failed twice before the rest came. You're going to hear strange things about me. Some of them will be true in pieces and wrong in the whole. What matters is simple. I loved you. I loved you every day I made the wrong choice about time and work and what counted. I kept thinking I could fix that later. Men say later because it feels cheap in the mouth. It costs everything in the end. Listen to your mother. Ask hard questions. Keep the pocket knife I gave you out of your school bag or she'll throw it away. I'm sorry I missed the field trip. I stopped there. Anything more would have been for me. The return locker held exactly what my counterpart had promised. Badge, sidearm, patch key, trauma bandage, and one family photo folded into the inner pouch. In it, the other Daniel stood with a woman and a little boy by a lake. The child had my son's ears and somebody else's grin. I put it back and went to the chamber. Wild stood at the home side control, blood drying down her temple, data feeds spilling across the screens. Once you trigger over there, I initiate from this side and lock the burn. 37 seconds. Can you hold this room that long? She looked at Hanley's body, then the dead guards, then the aperture. I have spent 20 years choosing silence. I can probably manage 37 seconds of noise. It was the closest thing to repentance she was capable of. The gate opened wider as I stepped onto the platform. Heat rolled off it. The black center no longer held stillness. It showed both chambers at once, ours and theirs sliding over each other like misaligned film. My counterpart waited on the far side, braced against a console with one hand pressed to his abdomen. When he saw me, he lifted 2 fingers in a gesture so familiar it felt like a reflex remembered from another life. I crossed. Passing through the gate always hurt in small ways nobody had ever named correctly. Pressure behind the eyes, teeth singing. Old injuries briefly remembering themselves. For one impossible instant I occupied the shape of every route my body might have taken. And then I was through, knees bent under me, blood from someone else's world slicking my boots. He shoved his badge into my hand and sagged against the chair. Up close he looked less like a mirror than a relative who had inherited the same faults. A scar on his chin I had never earned. A pale groove where his wedding ring had rubbed the skin. He smelled of blood and hot wiring. Family holding North Evac, he said. Claire, Ben. He almost smiled at my confusion. Not Mason here. I know. Tell her enough to run. His eyes flicked toward movement in the corridor. They're close. I got him into the secondary chair. The control layout matched ours with just enough changes to force thought into every motion. Good design for a failsafe, bad design under pursuit. I keyed his badge, laid my palm on the profile plate, and felt the system hesitate, compare, accept. Across the hard line, Wild's voice crackled. Home matrix ready. Mirror matrix armed. My counterpart gathered himself for one last act and set his hand over mine on the confirmation bar. The scanners saw what they wanted. Gene signature, role class, paired operators. One decent safeguard built by indecent people. The access door blew inward. 3 figures came through the smoke. One wore a deputy's tan shirt stretched over a torso split and reclosed with black stitches. One had half a paramedic patch on the chest and clear growth exposed along the neck. The third looked like a high school football coach until he moved, head cocking in tiny measuring increments, as if sorting us by available scripts. The coach smiled with somebody else's teeth. Daniel, it said in Claire's voice. I hit initiate. Every alarm in the chamber went solid. The control bars sank under our hands as the routing core began to eat itself. On the wall display, the third yard convulsed into white lines and broken geometry. Vehicles lurched forward driverless. One school bus lifted nose first and vanished into folding black. The deputy sprinted. I shot him twice. The rounds took bone and glass and barely slowed him. My counterpart fired at the exposed spine, and blue light flashed through the thing's neck. It collapsed in mid-step. The paramedic vaulted the side rail and came over the console with a shard of clear growth thrust from one forearm like a blade. I caught the strike on my left wrist and took the point through the shoulder instead of the throat. White pain burst through me. I drove my forehead into its face, seized the shard with my good hand and tore it free. More transparent fibers writhed in the wound like cut cable. The coach reached my counterpart. I saw him try to rise, saw the body fail, saw the thing's hands sink into his chest with appalling familiarity, as though reaching into a tackle box. My counterpart looked at me over its shoulder. Fear had burned away. Recognition remained. "Hold it," he said. Wild was counting in my ear. 21 seconds. 19. I slammed the stolen shard into the paramedic's throat and drove it off the console. The coach dragged my counterpart half out of the chair. Blood sheeted down the controls. On his side, the confirmation bar began to rise. If it came fully up, the burn would fail. I threw myself across the gap, pinned his hand and wrist down under mine, and put my whole weight into the bar. The coach turned toward me, face changing as it moved. Claire, Mason Alder, Boone, Hanley, some stranger from a campaign ad, back to Claire. It spoke in stacked domestic fragments. "Dinner at 6, bus stop at 4. Tell your mother I said—" I buried the shard in its eye. It kept talking. I drove the clear blade deeper until it punched through into whatever glass architecture sat behind the skull, and the whole body lit blue from the inside. It seized in place, 6 voices tearing through one mouth, then dropped and slid across the deck. 9 seconds. The chamber began to come apart. Panels blew from the walls. The aperture narrowed with violent sucking force, dragging tools, papers, and one dead body toward its black center. My counterpart sagged under my hand. He was gone. His profile still gave the scanner enough to read a matched pair, as long as I held him there. "Daniel," Wild said through hardline static, 4 seconds to break. I looked at the gate. The return path stuttered. Tunnel, slit, flicker. Nothing I trusted. I stayed where I was and bore down on the bar. The last thing I saw of the home chamber was Wild through sparks and smoke, one hand on the matrix control, the other pressing her own blood into the console as the root collapsed between us. Then the gate tore itself shut. Silence arrived in layers. First the alarm stopped, then the roaring pull at the center of the chamber died. Then the little sounds came back. Dripping coolant, a ruined speaker spitting static, my own breath dragging through my chest. I rolled off the console onto a floor slick with blood and glass. My left arm barely answered. The wound in my shoulder had burned all feeling down to a hot knot under the collarbone. The mirror chamber was wrecked. Half the wall had caved inward. The array at the center held only dead black metal now, ribs buckled and fused. No light, no pull, no root. The gate was finished. I laughed once, then stopped because it hurt. The other Daniel lay where the coach had left him. I closed his eyes because there was nothing else useful to do for him. North Evacuation sat 3 levels up in a hardened dormitory wing. I found it by following painted arrows, dropped rifles, and one trail of blood that may have been mine. Twice I heard movement in adjacent corridors and froze with my pistol raised, waiting for a stolen family voice to come through a speaker. None did. The base had become strangely honest in its damage. At the checkpoint outside evac, a woman in a torn windbreaker leveled a carbine at my face and demanded my badge. I gave her the mirror Daniel's credentials because they were all I had. She looked from the badge to me and lost color. "You were in core?" "Yes." "Is it closed?" "It's dead." She kept the rifle on me another second, then lowered it and waved me through. Claire stood near the back wall with a boy of about 11 pressed close to her side. Different Claire. Same jawline, Same watchful way of holding herself when she expected bad news and refused to let it knock her flat in public. The boy had the other Daniel's chin. Ben. She saw my face and went still. For one brutal second I understood the temptation the whole project had been built on. Same frame, same mouth, same posture under exhaustion. A widow in shock, a frightened child, an institution ready to slide a body into a role and keep the day moving. The system had counted on human hunger for continuity. I stopped 6 feet away. "I'm Daniel Carver from the connected facility," I said. "Your husband died closing the route." The words hit her like something physical. She took them standing. Ben stared at me as if I were a trick that had learned to bleed. "You look like him." "I know." Claire asked the only question that mattered. "Are we safe?" "Safer than we were an hour ago," I said. "That's the best answer I can give." She studied my face another moment and found enough truth there to choose function over collapse. "What do we do now?" "Leave this place before command decides survival is a security breach." That got the armed woman by the door to smile once, very briefly. We rolled out before dawn in a convoy of stripped-down utility trucks driven by mirror-side survivors who had finally accepted that chain of command was a corpse they were still dragging around. I rode in the back with a field dressing packed into my shoulder and the desert paling beyond the blast doors. Nevada looked the same on this side. That offended me more than the gate ever had. Same hard flats. Same low mountains cut against first light. Same roads running out through sage and dust as if the land had never hidden a secret under its ribs. The sunrise came up clean. The sky carried no red harvest stain, no omen. An hour out, a secure handset in the truck bed chirped once. The armed woman handed it to me. Wild. Her voice arrived thin through static. "The evidence burst got out before internal cutoffs. Archive relays are still coughing data across the dead core in one-way pulses. Not enough to reopen transit, enough to make denial difficult. So there it was, plain at last. The gate was dead for bodies. It still carried ghosts." "You alive?" I asked. "Yes, more than Reed, less than I deserve." "My message?" "Sent through the relay burst with the evidence package." "Did he get it?" A pause. "Your side acknowledged delivery to civilian hands. That is all I can confirm." Enough and nowhere near enough. She went on. "Mirror Provisional Command wants you debriefed, isolated and probably buried under 10 layers of classification. I advised against burial." "How kind." "I have one useful thing left," she said. "There will be placements on both sides. Ashton fed them for decades. The adjacent learned from every life it touched. You read behavioral drift faster than most of us. If you disappear into a hole, that knowledge goes with you." There it was again. Duty reshaped after catastrophe and offered like a cleaner sin. I closed my eyes against the truck wall. Boone flashed behind them, nodding once before the fire took the corridor. The other Daniel at the console, dead hand under mine. Mason on a speaker line reciting his bus stop to a father too distracted to understand the cost. "What's the condition?" I asked. "You work under your own name in sealed clearance on this side only. You do not take your counterpart's place. You do not enter his household except by invitation and with full disclosure. You help us identify what the program already seeded." I opened my eyes. Claire of this world sat across from me with Ben asleep against her shoulder, grief already changing the angle of her body. She would spend the rest of her life seeing my face in doorways and hating governments in ways language never quite catches. "You're trying to build an ethics memo after the fire," I said. "Yes," Wilde said. "It is ugly work. That makes you qualified." She let that pass. "Will you do it?" I looked at the highway running home in the wrong world. "Yes," I said, "on one condition." "Name it." "When the hearings start on your side or mine, you speak first." This pause lasted longer. Then, "Agreed." Months later, after engineers on both sides proved the dead gate could carry a monitored voice line through the old diagnostic harmonics but never flesh again, I stood outside a school in a small Nevada town on the mirror earth and watched buses pull up in a line. I wore a credential on a lanyard that named me Daniel Carver and belonged to no public records office on either world. My shoulder still caught in cold weather. My left hand had gone numb in 2 fingers from the glass wound. Those were easy prices. The hard one was geography. Every road here felt one turn away from home and led somewhere else. The work had become its own kind of hunt. Wilde and I built screening tools from the same training logic Ashton had used. Misplaced household detail, grief offered too early, local memory delivered like recitation, warmth applied where history should have earned it. We found placements. Some were human transfers who had lived under borrowed names for years and broke the moment daylight hit them. Some were adjacent composites caught before circulation. A few had lived long enough inside ordinary life that removing them tore holes through marriages, payrolls, school rosters, sheriff's departments. There was nothing clean left to restore. That too was part of the debt. Claire on this side had seen me 3 times since evacuation. First in a hospital room, where she asked for facts and took them standing up. Then in a federal office, where Ben waited outside with headphones on, while we discussed how much truth a child could carry without turning every stranger into a threat. The 3rd time was at a lakeside memorial for her husband, where she let me stand at the back among technicians, soldiers, and widows, while a pastor said words too small for the room. She never once asked me to pretend to be him. That mercy cut harder than accusation. On the morning outside the school, buses folded open one by one, and children came down carrying backpacks, lunchboxes, homework, arguments, and all the ordinary noise that had once looked harmless from a control room under the desert. A boy about Mason's age jumped the last step and nearly lost his binder. His mother caught him by the hood and laughed. A driver in District Blue told the line to keep moving and watch the curb. Real voice, real impatience, real day. My phone vibrated in my pocket with an unlisted number routed through federal relays and the new monitored bridge line that only existed because both governments were more afraid of silence now than of contact. Claire. My Claire. I answered and said nothing at first. Her breathing crossed the line. Then, Mason got your message. I sat down hard on a low concrete wall outside the school. He listened to it 5 times, she said. Then he asked if you were dead. The buses kept unloading. A crossing guard lifted one hand and traffic stopped. What did you tell him? The truth as far as it could go. Her voice carried older damage now, burned down into something steadier. I told him you were somewhere you chose because children there needed their fathers to make one correct decision. That cut deeper than if she had cursed me. Is he all right? He's angry. I know. He's also proud, which makes him angrier. I looked across the parking lot at a world I had helped save and would never belong to. That sounds like my kid. Silence stretched between us, full of roads neither of us could take. Then Claire said, "He kept the knife." I laughed despite myself. When the call ended, I stayed on the wall until the last bus had emptied and the lot went quiet. Morning sun climbed the facade. Somewhere inside, a bell rang and feet thundered through hallways. Life entering schedule. I still carried 2 access rings on my key loop. Mine from the dead base under my own world's desert, and his from the mirror chamber where the gate had closed. One cold in the hand, one worn warm by years of use. Proof that a government could treat a man as a slot in a machine, and proof that a man could still choose what to do with the slot when it opened under him. The project had spent decades teaching substitutes how to pass for ordinary. Smile here, grieve there, ask about weather, mention the right street, call the child by name. It never understood the one thing it needed most. A life is more than a pattern you memorize. It is the cost you agree to carry when every clean option is gone. I stood, clipped the rings back into my pocket, and walked toward the school doors to meet the local sheriff. We had another placement to interview, a deputy who had survived a rollover with the wrong childhood in his mouth. Work waited. It stayed ugly because the damage stayed real. Behind me, the buses pulled away one by one under the clear Nevada sun. For a second, the line of yellow bodies on the road looked so close to the first morning of my own life that grief rose sharp enough to stop me in place. Then the light shifted, the angle changed. This world became itself again. I went inside.